welcome to Austin.
Well, thank you.
Why don't you
Good to
introduce
be here.
yourself?
So my name's Carrie Goetz. I have been in this industry for a stupid amount of time, a little over 4 decades. And
Just getting
it's good to
started.
be here.
Where are you? I know you're from Indiana, but like, where are you from? Walk us through, like, because you're one of the, like you said, you're one of the OGs. You were here during the genesis of the time, and you're also one of those people that's out here spiritually and is an order within the space. You know, not just from a female perspective, but from a leadership perspective in general. So, those that don't know much about you, I had the privilege of meeting you years ago, and I'll share that story. We talked a little bit about that, but where did you, like, give us a nickel tour? Walk us around how you started.
So I was born in Indianapolis, Indiana. I lived there for a grand total of 13 whole days, which was kind of the mandatory hospital stay after a birth at the time. And then we moved to Detroit. We lived in several places around Detroit. That's when the riots were going on, which a lot of the young kids probably won't remember. And then we got tired of the riots. We moved to Chicago, and they were blowing up school buses there.
Dang.
So we moved to California.
Oh, my God.
And then we moved to Tennessee, and then I moved to Mississippi and lived there for about 40 years. And now we're in Texas. And now we're in Florida.
So the accent's Mississippi. So I
Well,
gotta
it's
be
a
careful
blended
how much
thing.
shit I talk in
Well,
Mississippi.
no, you can talk whatever you want. So the accent is like a blended hodgepodge, though, right? So when I'm outside of the South, people think I sound really Southern. But now if you go to Mississippi, they're really like, "Oh, honey, you're not from here, are you?"
Bless your heart.
Yeah.
So
Well, you don't want them to say "bless your heart." That never
that
means what it.
Yeah, I know. That means you and me
It's
the
a
dumbest.
little different.
No, I get that here. I remember from my first year here, everyone said that I was telling people, like, these people are the nicest. Everyone, like, when I say something stupid, they just say "bless your heart" and they give me a second chance. They're like, that's not what they're saying.
Yeah, that's not what that means.
They're saying you need to not be able, like, you need adult supervision at all times is what they're saying when they say
Pretty
that.
much, yeah.
So how do you go from, like, what did your family do that allowed you guys to nomad like that?
My dad was just a greener pasture kind of guy. You know, a lot of people think I was a military brat because I was in, I think, 5 or 6 elementary schools in 3 years. You know, just moving a lot, just because
That's
of
common in military.
circumstances. But yeah, not a military person. My dad just was a greener pastures kind of guy. My mom
Was he a builder or something? Did he do something with his hands? He's a corporate America guy, white collar?
He's in advertising. He held the world's record in the breaststroke at Syracuse University and caught mono 3 days before he was supposed to go to the Olympics.
Ooh.
Yeah, and that kind of wrecked that. And then after that, he stayed in advertising and just kind of moved around as it went. My mom was in advertising for a while too. She had her own television show in Bakersfield. She was the anchor for the morning news show there. She got bit by a leopard on her news show.
Shut up. Is there a YouTube video of that?
Oh, I doubt it. That was way too many years ago. But they had the Buck Owens big Pro-Am tournament there. And she was emceeing there, and they had the guy that raises the Wildcats remember the old Lincoln Mercury Cougar, the Cougar that came on the commercials and all? Well, she was petting that dude.
And
that's back in the days when everybody wore polyester pantsuits, and it started rubbing its head on her pant leg and got its tooth stuck in her polyester and freaked out and just bit like a big chunk
No
in the
way.
back of her. Yeah, yeah.
Got it, though.
You know, he got it. Yeah, she had to file workman's comp for a leopard bite.
If I had $1 for every time I heard that story. That was your mom?
You'd be broke.
Well, hold on. So when are you the oldest, youngest, the only
No,
child?
I'm a middle kid.
How many you got?
There's 3. So I've got an older sister, younger brother.
Older sister, younger brother. How much older?
Well, we're Irish twins. The
Oh,
older one,
9 months.
Yeah, my little brother, 11.
10.
But my little brother, yeah, he's a couple years younger.
I got you. And are they here in Texas? Or you're in Florida? So
No. So I've got a sister in Pennsylvania. My brother is in Tennessee. My mother is in Michigan.
So how did you get to this Mother Teresa thing where you fostered like 700 kids and stuff like?
Because I just think kids don't deserve to be in a bad situation. And I don't think that they need to necessarily have to go to foster care. I think that, you know, that old saying, it takes a village.
Sure.
I think it does. And sometimes you find a kid that's just not in a good way or not in a good place for a variety of reasons. Sometimes of their own doing, sometimes not of their own doing, which was most of them. And, you know, just being able to open your heart, open your home, and give them a little different chance.
That seems to be your purpose, right? To help like that. Seems like that's why you wrote your book too, is you're always here to try to help like sheepdog stuff.
What trips my trigger?
Trips the trigger. I need to add that to the lexicon. So you're the middle of 3
Yep.
and you moved all over and you went California to Tennessee to Mississippi.
Yep.
Now, how old were you when you landed in Mississippi?
I was, let's see, my daughter is 41. So yeah, about 40 years ago. I was about, well, see, it was 40 years ago. So I would have been.
So right before you
Now we're getting into age. Yeah, right before I was born. No, I was 22. Yeah.
So, but hold on, at 22, what were you doing? What were you doing at that time? I mean, we're going to figure out the breadcrumbs that led from, I mean, there was no internet back in those days.
I started, my first kind of degree was in architecture. And then I started teaching that at a technical college. And then I started teaching some computer programming. AutoCAD came out.
Were you just a nerd? Were you an athlete? What were you?
No, I was definitely not an athlete. I am the klutz patrol. I own klutz. If you look up klutz in the dictionary, there I am.
Will there be a picture too?
There will be a picture, yeah, and probably some unhappy
Do you wear heels?
moment.
Back in the day, do you used to run around?
No, I used to.
Okay.
I bartended in stilettos. I could do that.
No kidding.
Probably not now, but
for someone who's a klutz, that's a risky game. Like you break an ankle or a neck, right?
Well, you have to build up those muscles. You don't do that all at once. I can't promise I was successful the first time I walked on heels.
I got a few friends that have been building those muscles up, but like they got a long way to go. Like these guys aren't used to those types of heels, so they got to get those calf muscles and the Achilles broke up. But I'll tell you, like, how did you know that this? Were you just a curious kid? Were you just
I just have always liked learning. No, I skipped some grades going through school. I graduated young, and I'm just one of those people. I like learning new things. And once technology hit and I started playing around with code and started learning computers, then it's just, you just can't.
So
I couldn't sponge it up enough. So I started teaching it. Then they had a project. They needed to tie several campuses together. And since I wasn't afraid that a computer would chew my arm off up to the elbow, they asked if I would take that on. And back then, nobody knew what networking was. We were still System 36s, AS400s. Oh, yeah, yeah. And I started consulting and ended up putting in networks all over the place. I spent a very long time working in casinos, hooking up wide area networks and local area networks for them and getting all that
fun
online.
Casinos? Like any of the cool ones?
There was some really cool ones. You learn a lot in casinos. A lot of the people that are gambling in casinos are not actually average Joes. They're security people. And a woman traveling by yourself, there's a lot that you can't do when you travel or a lot you don't feel safe doing. Years ago, there was a woman I used to work with that got brutalized. So they took all the female travelers and put us through this program on what to do, where to go, and taught you things like don't stay in hotels where the doors open outside.
Oh, for sure.
Back then, a lot of the hotels had female-friendly floors where they would reserve a floor just for female travelers. They don't do that anymore, but they had all these different things that they kind of teach you and train you, and I completely forgot what the hell I was going to say.
No, I took you down a deep path because I'm like, where were you? Like, that's first of all crazy that they used to have dedicated floors for women, and but I could see that. And you were here during the genesis of the technology boom.
Oh yeah,
and you're an architect. You were saying, and I'm trying to figure out, like, it makes sense that networking and building WANs from an architectural perspective and a network perspective.
But that wasn't really it. For me, it was the technology. It was the ability to make something do something and the ability to connect things. And then once you start, then you can't quit, right? You start with one programming language, you learn 5. You start with one networking thing, and then, back then, Cisco wasn't even, he was a little guy.
Sure. So where were you getting, like right now we're flooded with so much information that it's not a problem finding data. It's trying to figure out which data is the most refined or the most accurate, or in some cases the most honest. But you have to figure out where you're mining your data from. So like back in those days, was it mostly, there wasn't.
Oh, there was, I'm going to tell you, anybody in my age, well, I would say probably 50 and up, and even most people today, I think, in this industry, it's the largest apprenticeship program in the world.
Explain that, because you mentioned that before, and I was fascinated by that. Help explain what your mind is, because you were all in it together. No one knew. Everyone was learning together, right?
Exactly. And we all screwed up together. You figured out really quick that you can't spin your wheels sitting there trying to make something work. You've got to call a help desk because it's new technology. It's their technology.
Sure.
And so you have to kind of put yourself to the side and just make it work. But then after that technology, there's another cool new technology and another cool new technology. And as you start building departments and building teams, you have to pass on that knowledge, and then they pass that knowledge on to the customer. And so this industry still does that. Every 3 years, this industry completely reinvents itself.
I think, so I agree with that, but I think the way that I explain it is it doesn't reinvent itself every 3 years, but every 3 years it's a different industry because I feel that it reinvents itself on a monthly basis.
Well, kind of.
It's completely transformed in some cases, like the means and methods and how we build and deliver data center capacity right now is wildly different than it was a year ago, which means in a year from now, it's going to be that.
It's going to be absolutely different. But that's innovation, see? And that's the real trick. When people talk about diversity in the industry, that's what they're missing. Diversity has nothing to do with what they teach you diversity is. Diversity is different trains of thought and the different ways people think and the different ways people put things together. That's where innovation comes from. You remember the years ago, they had this deal where the engineer drew the swing and then they made the swing and they had to cut a chunk of the tree out of the middle so the swing wouldn't fly. Have you seen that one? All right, so it's a picture of a tree and it's how the engineer drew it and then how they go to build it in the field, and all of a sudden they realize the swing is going to smack the tree. So somebody cuts out a section of the tree. Now the swing can swing, right? But what happens to the end user that comes along that wants to sit on there that now doesn't want to bash their head on the top of the tree where they've cut that little slot out? And so that's really where innovation comes from. When you bring all these people together, if that engineer had somebody in construction when he was designing that swing, he would have known it can't swing through a tree. And if the guy that cut the piece of the tree out had the end user there to say, hey, look, that hole needs to be bigger, I'm going to smack my head on that tree, then they would have made the hole bigger or maybe even hung the swing in a different place. And so when we talk about diversity, in my opinion, in this industry, it's really that. It's that diversity of thought. It's the people that build things. It's the people that play around and tinker with cars that who thought about putting a radiator on the back of a server cabinet? That's what a rear door heat exchanger is pretty much, right?
Yeah, that's a fair question.
So that was somebody that thought differently and thought outside of the box. And I think if you force everybody into a college setting and you force everybody to learn a single way, you really engineer a lot of that diversity out. You really do, because you're teaching people how to think, and that's not what you want to do. You want to, let people know here's a problem or here's an opportunity for something to improve. And really, that's honestly what this whole industry is. It's continuous improvement. We take something that didn't work yesterday, somebody comes up with something new, and then we improve on it tomorrow. And it's the people that aren't afraid to jump in and do that, whether they have a degree or not. They see a problem, they decide to fix it, and they go work on something. And that's where that innovation comes from. And sometimes, when I say it reinvents itself every 3 years, what I mean by that, it's really cyclical. Mm-hmm. Stuff that we decided didn't work 3 years ago, some brilliant person got together and said, no, wait a minute, let's not scrap that idea.
It's just ahead of its time. It's too mature.
It's ahead of its time, or in this industry is risk averse. So I think sometimes there's some self-inflicted wounds here. People don't want to try new things until somebody else does.
I think the herd mentality is the best way to describe our industry. But I also think that, I'm not saying we're a commodity like a cell phone, but if you think that they don't have 10 generations of cell phones designed by now that are the phones that we'll be using in 5 years from now, they're designed.
They're probably going to be implanted in your hand anyway.
Well, there will be groups, like I think we've learned that there's kind of two different camps, those that buy all in and those are kind of like, let's wait and see. My iPhone I got the first time like a year and a half after they came out. I didn't wait, 4 hours in line or whatever. I think there's just always a laggard or a late adopter like me. My thing is there will be big changes, I think, that continue to iterate, but I think that we're going to see different places where some of those changes are being driven from. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Look at edge, right? Edge computing, we've been talking about that for 5 years now, maybe 6 years now at least. The problem with edge is that people can't monetize it. They don't know how to make that model work because people aren't buying 20, 40, 60 cabinets out at the edge. They're buying a few rack units. Yeah. And they're using it for a specific purpose. It might be streaming, maybe it's for cache for streaming or other things. Autonomous vehicles, they're going to have to be everywhere.
Yeah.
Precision agriculture, they're going to have to be everywhere. And so as we start building out these edge computing centers, the model's very different because the monetization is very different. And so the ones that have done that and done it well are the content providers because they're building them under their cell towers. They're building them where they need for streaming content. but we've just scratched the iceberg of what's going to use all those.
I think it's interesting because you bring up so many valid points. I look at it and I'm like, how does it shift from a CapEx model to an OpEx model so it's more versatile and you could be used by anybody? Because I think in spite of that technology, I agree with you. I think that technology, a lot of things, modularity, I mean, all the keywords, tricky phrases, and buzzwords that I've heard for years since I've been in this industry, I am seeing the adoption rate for some of those things change. And I'm seeing it because the market's mature enough. It's not necessarily because, like I said, going back to the cell phone thing was like, hey, they haven't made all the money they intended to make off this product. So they're not, until they've reached that milestone, they're not going to release the next phone. That's why it's not like based on technology. When we arrive at another piece of technology, you get it. No, it's when we've maximized the amount of money we can make on this product, then we'll shift, when we start seeing a trend. So I think that for us, we don't see that, right? Because in most cases, the innovation that we get to see, it pencils very well, right, for everybody. And I think the more that you have competition on that edge side, it'll make it, like you said, people will have to figure out a way to monetize it where I think that there's groups now that have turned it into a complete OpEx model. So they're basically getting an edge service as a service, whatever the language is and how they codify it. But like, I think that those secondary markets and those third tier markets are going to continue to emerge because of us. You're not living in it. Oh, you are in an NFL city, I guess, but I'm not.
I am, yeah.
But think about all those that aren't.
I was not, until a couple of years ago.
Well, listen, we haven't unpackaged all that. So you went back to Tennessee. I want to go back. Why did you go to Tennessee? Oh, no. Why did you go to Mississippi?
An ex.
Ah.
That moves a lot of women around. Yeah.
Yeah, you take a number. I don't think the women have I don't think you corner the market on making bad decisions to move for the wrong person. I think there's a lot of guys I know that have.
But, it was a great place to raise my kid. It's a beautiful part of the world. I have no complaints. Mississippi. Yeah.
Where were you?
I was right outside it. Well, I was in Bentonia for a long time. Population 371. Salute.
No kidding.
Yeah. That's where my ex was from. And then...
were you in technology, though? Like, that's what I'm saying. When I think of Minnesota...
do you know Jackson, Mississippi used to be the telecommunications capital of the United States?
From... what was the genesis for that? I mean, who set up shop there?
WorldCom was there. MCI was there. UUNet was there. Yeah.
What happened? I guess the state probably changed some regulations or governance or something in that.
Well, there was a whole little jail time for a certain CEO there, and then a company had to move. So I think they stopped being WorldCom and they started being MCI, and UUNet moved out, and of course, growth and change and all that kind of good stuff. But they used to be really massive, and also, just because you live there doesn't mean you necessarily work there. Like, I used to visit my husband in furniture probably and kids a lot, because you travel.
So let me ask you this. It sounds like you got into the industry from the architectural side and then just genuine curiosity in the technology. During that time, like, to go back, I think that's one of the coolest phrases that you use is like, all of us that happen to find ourselves in this industry, which probably wasn't called the data center or mission critical.
We didn't even have data centers back then. We had computer rooms.
So whatever the industry was referred to is probably just an advanced, industrial or commercial industry. No one probably knew how to name it yet, but when that was building and you were watching certain people gravitate towards certain companies and certain people stack and align themselves from, one altitude to the other in terms of whether they're an SME or a leader of teams or whatever, right? As that was all taking shape and you were watching literally the birth of the data center industry, what was your thoughts and what were you seeing? And like, how did the industry work in that sense to where you're like, this is where I'm going to spend the next 40 years of my life. And in that time, this is the industry that's going to allow me to do these other things that are part of my purpose.
You are giving me way too much credit for forethought.
Well, hold on. I think that I spent enough time with you now to understand, like, you got a lot of horsepower upstairs. So I know that you're not absent-minded in the way that you approach shit, right? Your book kind of shows that. We're hosting an event at the end of this month, and I think we're buying 100, 150 copies to hand out. But what I'm saying is that's how profound it was. I gave one to the members of my team. We have a lot of people that we bring in from outside the industry, and they have no idea what the dialect or anything.
That was a big part of the reason that I wrote that book.
So when was that? You want to start at that first then? Like, when did you wake up and be like, I'm writing a book?
Well, I've done a lot of writing throughout my career anyway. Lots of white papers. I've developed tons of curriculum because that's how you pass that knowledge on, right? Yeah. And so I was looking to buy some books to donate to a coding academy, something about the data center industry, because a lot of the kids, I think, coding is really the only exposure they get to tech. And,
That's true.
And if they hate to code, then they assume they hate tech. And that's such a tiny, mini little piece of the whole industry, is, especially the data center industry. And so I got to looking, and there's the only thing out there. There was an 800-page book that was co-written by 59 industry professionals. And I thought, who in the heck is going to read that to see if they want to join an industry?
Never even heard of it.
Because there's no real data center curriculum out there. There's a few programs, but not a lot. And honestly, this industry is so crazy vast that there's room for everybody. This industry has the ability to be the most diverse industry on the planet, and it should be.
What's stopping it?
Sometimes we just can't get out of our way, I think.
Who's we?
People as a whole. But I think part of it is that we're not attracting kids because the kids don't realize that this industry exists. Unless you happen to live like in a Loudoun County or something.
Yeah.
Go home and ask your kids, have you learned about data centers in school?
So it's funny you say that. My son is a freshman in college right now, and he was sending me questions for the very first time. He's in his second semester, his freshman year of college. He's writing some paper, he's in, and I'm explaining things in the simplest of terms, but I've noticed that, you could ask a doctor, you could show the doctor 5 different doctors the same thing, get 5 different answers. And I've learned that over the course of time. Of course, I've had conversations with my kids. I try to have conversations suitable for the backyard barbecue, but I've noticed, and my kid has even helped me understand that it's very inconsistent in how I talk about it. It is almost like the message itself or the narrative about our industry evolves as we do. Would you agree?
Well, the industry evolves.
So,
continuously.
How do you code lock something to where kids that are exposed to that now understand what that will still kind of look like? And I think it's just a broader aperture we have to figure out how to speak to versus a very narrow focused one.
Well, my thing is, I think first off, you have to have exposure, right? You can't ask an intelligent question if you're ignorant, and we're all ignorant till we know. And I don't think it should be that difficult. I think that kids should have the opportunity to see this as a career path. Now, there are data centers in every single city that you know. They might be a company-owned data center.
The hub and the spoke,
exactly. Right. They might be a company-owned data center. It might be a piece of a cloud. It might be edge data centers going in, or it might be a big colo area like Austin or Dallas or Loudoun County, Virginia, or some of those others, or even developing countries where there aren't many, and they're just trying to figure that out. But my take is, when I decided to write this book, I was going for 3 things. 1, like I said, there wasn't anything out there like that. 2, I don't think it has to be that difficult. I think that you can give a high-level view of what the industry is so somebody can see where they fit in. It's not if they fit in, it's where they fit in.
I agree with that.
And it's not just, some people like to write code, and we need those people. We need them in the data center. We need them out of the data center. But don't tell the coders I said this, but that's a little tiny piece of the pie, right? So I think just letting them know. So the goal with this book was pretty easy. I wanted it to be under 200 pages. I didn't quite make it. It's 210, but I was close. I wanted it to be easily digestible in a weekend. I wanted it to have some simple explanations for some of the technical terms and acronyms that people are going to see, but I wanted it to be easy enough that somebody from like junior high up could understand it, because this industry can get technical. And I think one of the problems that we have in this industry is everybody that writes these books and does all these things, which a lot of them tend to be vendor kind of related, but they all write it in such a technical way that the first page, in a lot of cases, people just gloss over and they completely lose it, and they think, oh, this is not for me because it's too hard, or I have to do too much math, and a lot of it, some of that's the way it's presented in school. Some of that's just an assumption. Like, we know we use tech, right? We know how to make an app work on our phone. But if I came to you and said, I need you to write that program right there, and that's going to be your career in tech, and that's the only exposure you get, what are you going to do? You're going to run for the hills. And I just don't think that it needs to be that bad. So I particularly hit women, trades, and vets. It obviously applies to everybody.
Not enough pictures for us veterans. I'm just being honest. Maybe some pop-ups.
They cost more. And then you have to go over an extra 200 pages. But anyway, I'll make pictures for you guys if you want. I'm happy to do that. But the point was, trades, I think we owe the trades everything. If it weren't for the trades, nothing would be built. And I think the people that know how to just reach and get it and make things fit and make things work, that is invaluable knowledge.
I think you're talking about like, listen, if I'm hearing you right, because I don't want to, you're talking about people that have a trade craft, a skill. They use their hands to do things that can bring things to life, visions to life. Is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely.
So to that end, I agree. I think that there's more, there's a lot of honor in some of the things that people do. Like I run into these construction programs and the people that are just specialists, it's almost like they're art, like coders would kind of call it. It is art. But these people that are building at every element throughout the trades, that's a special talent. And now I think there was a time where we took that for granted until now we're all, I mean, you're talking about 40 years in industry, and I mean, half of our industry has been in this industry for more than 20 years. You know, the silver tsunamis.
I hope I'm part of that.
Well, listen, those
at some point.
But before you do, you're leaving your fingerprint on the industry, you know, with your books and podcasts and all the things that you guys are doing. And I know that you're a champion of a lot of things. I could tell, I knew before you and I were going to talk about certain things, because I specifically was like, I'm not talking about that with you because I want to talk about certain things. But I also knew that there's so much to unpack. And I think like the books are awesome and I love books. I'm in a part in my life in which, you know what I love more than books? Audiobooks. Because I can listen to your audiobook while lifting weights. I can listen to it while driving down the road. Because
that's being edited right now.
My thing is this is, I lost all confidence in media. So, I mean, more of like the news media, I think that if you look back in time, there's enough elements in which they're just, I don't know of another industry that could be wrong so often and still have such high interest, right? Like you could be wrong about everything and people will still turn that thing on.
It's almost like they're all weathermen.
Must be nice. But I started shifting over to what I can listen to because I started just gorging myself on podcasts, right? And I wanted to find out as much as I could. So I'm just scrambling through and being like, who's got a podcast about this industry that I can chew through? And I think that your book was awesome because there are people that are they're going to be in stages of their life where they can sit down and read it over the weekend. A lot of people that are trying to reinvent themselves, they're healing over the weekend or recovering, you know, from doing something a lot of people aren't happy with what they do. Can you believe that? I mean, like a lot of people are not happy with what they do for a living. And oh
yeah. Do you know 1/3 of all college graduates work in a job that has nothing to do with their degree?
I'm not even a little surprised. Yeah. I'm not. I mean,
and so I think that's the deal. There's room for this industry is so vast between just the data centers themselves, everything that supports them, all of the technology that goes into them, marketing, you know, outreach, finance, legal, there's room, real estate, you know, there's room for tons and tons of professions in the data center industry. And my deal was, I just want people to know them. So I want, if a kid is coming out of high school or a vet is transitioning, I wanted something they could sit down and consume in a weekend and say, oh, this is where I fit. Now you can go find those other specialties, or you can figure out, you know, maybe some kid grew up on his dad's farm and he loves driving heavy equipment. Well, hey, we need those too.
So I think it's all a game of figuring out how to share that information. What you have that you put into a book. I mean, I don't remember how many times I saw people. I mean, how do you feel about the books? How do you feel about the way it was embraced?
I am beyond blessed and so thankful. You know, in this industry, you're kind of nothing without your network. And it's all the people around you that are going to make you successful.
100%.
Whether it's answering a question, it's supporting an endeavor, it's putting your name forward, it's, you know, feeling comfortable enough with you to ask a question so that you can point them in the right direction. All of that, I think, is so critical. But yeah, the outpouring with this book, I'm going to tell you, it is terrifying. Like to put all that out on paper and then put it out.
You're vulnerable.
I mean, you put yourself out there in a big way. And it could go one of two ways. You know, there's some people that probably love this book. There's probably other industry vets that have read the book and said, wow, this is like really simple.
Well,
to which I respond, veterans. Well, yeah.
It's not for them. It's not for them,
yeah, right?
Like, listen, my chief strategy officer who you met, he read the book. And before we even talked, he goes, we need to, I think we're buying 150 books for Operation HIT.
Yep.
at the end of this month, we're hosting this, we want 300 veterans there. The first 150 to register are going to get that book. That will give them a roadmap, right?
Sure.
I do think that you have said so many things, though, that are like, I wonder how we package up a narrative regarding what that data center is, and it's targeted towards a different audience, which could be high school level or maybe even younger than that, right? Because let's face it, there are kids right now. I mean, I have kids, I have a daughter in high school, and there are jobs that she will probably do when she graduates from college that don't even exist today in this industry. And I'm with you. Throughout the 5 phases of the data center life cycle, there's, let's say, 250 different jobs. I think that it's better to have them in tech, even if they're not techie. I think that's an element too. Meaning,
sometimes they're the best troubleshooters. If you write code, the best thing you can do is go find somebody that knows nothing about tech. Like years and years and years ago, way the hell before it's time, back to that conversation, I wrote this program called Grocer Easy. And so what you do is you take your grocery store and you set it up in aisle order, like where all the different things are. And then you got a barcode scanner, and every time you use something, you scan the barcode, it adds it to the list, it would transmit it to the grocery store.
And you just did this on your free time?
I did this a long time ago. Yeah, a long time ago. That's back when I was writing code. And you would transmit it to the grocery store. They could fill your order, have it sitting in the cooler. You drive up and pick it. If you wanted to get your own fruits and vegetables, you could. And then it would tie into the pharmacy, so you could get your prescriptions filled, and then also your calendar, so you could do family, like birthday cards and all that stuff. And for the grocer, it was great because he would find out what you're buying from somebody else because he wouldn't be able to fill that part of the order, right? Unlike what we have today. And also, it would help him know that maybe he needed it on the shelf. So now he's better stocking for his neighborhood and the desires of the people that buy food at his grocery store. And I took it to some major grocery store chains and some major drugstore chains, and they said, nobody's ever going to let anybody pick out their groceries. Nobody's going to do that, and nobody's going to, we have privacy laws. You're not going to be able to transmit prescription information over the internet. It's never going to happen. And so a few years of development and a lot of hard work, and I gave it to people that were on chemo. And I said, take this, test it, give it to your caregiver, let me know everything that's wrong, let me know everything that's right. And the non-technical people were great. And so, those are things kind of where you reach out to people that have no expertise, where that expertise is like crazy invaluable. In some cases, ignorance is invaluable because they're the ones that are going to ask the questions. They're going to ask those questions that people that know something sitting in the room are probably scared to ask because they don't want to sound stupid.
Yeah.
Right? But the people that are ignorant, they don't know.
Yeah.
Ignorance is such a great quality. It's, like that child's innocence, because we're all ignorant. I mean, everybody is about everything that we don't know about. And even the stuff we know about, we might find out, 2 or 3 months from now that
I'm still ignorant.
I'm still ignorant. Yeah.
But like you said, you put yourself out there with that book, and I mean, everybody's guarded in this industry, right? So, I mean, I've had enough Q&As with people to where some people you just got to keep cracking at them, but I do think it'd be great for others to hear your voice that don't have the chance to read the book yet. Maybe they have it and they're parking it and they're like, I'm going to get to it that's like a dessert item. Like when I get to the point where I have the chance, that'll be when I'm on vacation. The podcast, the audio version, it sounds like, how long are you away from doing the audio version?
It's in editing right now, so it should come out soon.
Well, my thing is this. Let me share with you the story on how you came across my radar, right? It was, and it's funny because I don't expect you to remember because you're kind of a big deal and I'm still,
I'm not a big deal. I'm just me.
You're writing books. My thing is, I reached out to Mercy when I worked with her at Align Data Centers, and I was hosting this little conference in Austin called DCAC. And Mercy is the type of person that, at the time, she lived in Gotham City. I always called it, and we could not have had different opinions on certain things, but I could not have had more respect for her. Still do. She's a powerhouse.
She's amazing.
And I remember talking to her, and I said, you know what I need? Because every year at DCAC, the same complaints. Every year, even last year, I get my ass kicked.
Where's the estrogen balance?
Where's the women? And I'm like, if I ask 10 women to be on this podcast, one says yes. I think, in fact, you're 2 or you're 3. And That's
Well, that means I'm in the top 3, right?
that's right. But like, is that my fault? Like, I ask people, and I get it, but people don't want to. Whatever they're going to rationalize, it's just a decision. They've decided like that's not a big priority, or no, thank you. I don't want to be putting myself out there. But it's hard, and you got to put yourself out there. But like, how do we turn on not just the younger generations, but a lot more of the females that I have a daughter. Most of my leadership team, we all have daughters. So when we look at everything, we look at it through the optics of how do we need to operate in a way to where we could set this program up to where our daughters could be here and take over these roles. And I learned that through one of my mentors who has really, I think that you're going to have a hard time finding a company that has dedicated as much effort into the diversity and inclusion side. I'm not saying that there aren't companies out there that are really putting everything they got into it, but I think Compass has done a pretty amazing job of trying to shift a lot of models to where anybody can do anything in this space.
Yeah.
That's it, up, over, and out, right? And I'm trying to open up opportunities to where, look, if you're not a techie because you're intimidated by that stuff, then come be in BD or marketing or sales or HR or finance or any other operational business functionality besides technical stuff. And then you could kind of gravitate around that. You could be in orbit around it by working at a tech company and then one day be like, you know what, maybe I could get into that, and
it's less intimidating because you've had exposure, right? And that, I think, is what we're lacking, especially in so many schools and stuff, because, women want to see themselves in a role. They want to see a board member that's a woman at a company, so they say. Companies that have women on the board do a lot better financially than companies that don't have women on the board. And so I think part of that is just seeing that. And to your point, and I'm going to bust your chops here a little bit, but,
right.
You bring a woman in and you say, okay, well, here's HR, here's marketing, here's sales. And that's normally where they try to put women. I think what we have to do is we have to open up more technology sources where it's not so damn intimidating.
How?
And I think part of it is coding academies, but I think it has to go past coding. I think it has to be, we have to change career days. Like, I'll give you a really great example. I've got a good friend right now in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She opened her own company. She's supplying in the data center space. She's doing some stuff. She has 2 young sons that are, elementary school age. And she wanted to come in and read a book or talk about data centers. She had some little Lego kits from a little edge computing data center that, she could give out and want to do something with kids. And they told her no. So absolutely not. It doesn't fit in our curriculum. We don't know where to put you in. We can't do that. And she said, well, we can read to the kids, right? They said, yeah. She said, well, can I read a book on data centers? No, we can't allow that. You know what they allowed her to read? A book on farts.
Well, that's important as you get older.
Well, yeah. We all do that. But the point was, we have to start, like, there's a children's version of this book that's coming out too called Polly Packet's Payload. But anyway, it talks about how the packets get cut up and move through the internet, but through a child story. And I think we have to start having some of that exposure at a younger age. But it means things like, data centers need to start having more student tours. They need to start reaching out. Yeah. We need to do more community outreach as an industry as a whole. And I know there's a lot of us that do that, but it tends to be in certain markets and it tends not to be kind of everywhere. And it is an exposure thing. And I think there's so much that's being shoved onto kids these days that you just wonder how much of it is really good life skills and how much, could be helpful to them. And I think especially when I was I skipped several grades and took advanced classes in a lot of stuff. My first exposure to tech was in college. My first real exposure to tech.
And what way was it? What was the exposure? Was it?
Oh, it was a class.
But what was the
punch card coding?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you signed up for a coding class in college?
I did. Yeah. Well, it was a requirement for part of the math that I was going for, but it changes with every year. And part of the problem that we have with the school system, I think, is that curriculum is very, very slow. It doesn't change very quickly. It doesn't adopt very quickly. How long have we had data centers now?
Yeah.
How many data center curriculum do we have? There's like 6 that I can count of worldwide that really have that kind of curriculum. So what happens is kids go to coding, they go to IT administration, and that's how they come in the industry. They go into engineering. That's how they come in the industry. Data centers is an elective or it's a class project. I work with several students on their capstone projects. It's a project. It's not a class. It's not a purpose. And so what happens when you start going through kids with career day and you look down the list and see all the things, you never see data centers.
Yeah.
You never see that. And, when you do see technology, it's all code. And this is the thing that really just chaps me, is that, you take these kids and they're lit up about technology and they think it's so cool and they think it's so exciting, and you put them in a coding class and they get lost
in the weeds.
And you've lost them. It's not like, oh, you didn't like coding. How about this? Would you like to learn about HVAC? Would you like to learn about servers and the hardware this stuff sits on? Would you like to learn about how it transfers all over the internet? Would you like to learn this or that? We don't teach that. And so I think that myopic approach to technology education really hurts us in the industry. So where we pick up from that is apprenticeship programs, internship programs. You talked about Compass. They do a great job. I know Nancy takes young women, puts them out there, has them take pictures all over the job site, come back and they talk about it, and that's on-the-job training.
A lot of immersion.
That's exactly how we all learned.
Yeah, through immersion.
Yeah.
It's being there, being exposed. You learn the dialect, you learn the lingo, all the abbreviations in the space and how to talk shorthand. You have to be in those rooms where you're Googling like half the things that people are saying for the first year or two.
But there has to be so much more exposure than just, coding. I fell into this because I know somebody in the industry.
Who? You mean like as the general thing?
Yeah,
that is true. I've brought in a lot of, I almost look at like the career development days of school where they're lacking data centers. I mean, they're lacking military too. I mean, less than 1% of the U.S. population has ever joined. And I look at that, and it's not really seen as something that is encouraged, and data centers aren't really either.
Well, I'm going to say my generation is probably slightly responsible for that. As we were growing up, it kind of got ingrained in our head, you got to have college because that's how you make money, because those jobs back then didn't pay well.
Well, not just that, but you have to do that to get money, and that will help you be happy.
Yes. And so it got to be this cycle where, we're pushing everybody into college, but everybody learns differently.
Yeah.
And, people that have had a horrible time in high school might not want to sign straight up for college. Maybe they want to go figure out what they want to do. I mean, look at if you take all of the college debt in the United States right now and realize that a third of those people don't even work in that industry, where they still owe probably $100,000 in college debt. We got to change things.
Some of my best friends in this industry have never set foot on a college campus, and they make an amazing living, and they have a huge influence on the industry. And it's not because they went to some fancy school. And I'm not trivializing those schools. And I'm just simply saying, like, this is an industry that rewards those that want to work hard and are genuinely curious to learn more about the way the industry is evolving.
Well, and that's kind of my point. There's a million ways to learn, right? If you take somebody on the spectrum, they're going to learn differently than if you take somebody that's not. If you take somebody that is hearing impaired or sight impaired, they might learn differently than somebody that's not. If you take somebody that when they go home, their parents can't help them with the homework, they're going to learn differently than somebody that has an environment where their parents are college educated and help them with all these things. And so I think what we have to do is realize that as a whole, as society, we have to start meeting people where they want to work. If somebody wants to go in the military, thank you for your service. God bless you and the family that supports you, because it's a family sacrifice. And I think you deserve every opportunity when you get out. If you're, it doesn't really matter. If you go to college when you're 40 or 50 years old, if that's what you want to do, that's great. My thing is we need these on-ramps into the industry where people can come in and then they start getting that exposure. Maybe you have some guy that really likes driving bulldozers. Put him on a construction crew.
Sure.
He's absolutely necessary. It's not a wannabe. It's not a nice to have. He's absolutely necessary.
There's a lot of value in that.
He's as necessary as that guy that's going to operate that thing later down the road, right? Because without him, it's not going to be built. So let's take him or her, put him in that situation. Let's start exposing him to the rest of the industry.
Yes.
And let's see where they can go. Heavy equipment operators make bank. What a lot of people don't realize, that show, Micro Dirty Jobs. You ever watch that show?
All the time.
I love that show. Do you know that most of the people that he interviews on that show are millionaires?
Oh, well, I wouldn't be surprised.
The vast majority of them are millionaires because nobody else wants to do that
job. Yeah, it makes sense. I think that it's an interesting time, right? Because the kids these days that are going to be the future of this industry, they're immersed in tech in ways, and they may use technology in better ways than we do, right? They're just so much more fluent at a younger age on certain things. Like my kids now will show me things, and I'm not an idiot on tech, but even they will come and be like, oh man, let's have this phone. I'll show you what's up. Right. And I'm okay with that because I'm excited to see them genuinely curious and exploring all realms of the tech. But I do think that we may see the pendulum shift away where there is, in some cases, enough examples to where there were some industries in certain days in which you had to certainly have certain backgrounds and college degrees for, and there still remains, right? But there's a lot of things that are still the Wild Wild West, and emerging industries like this one that is really like, well, it's all about your desire to want to reinvent yourself. It's a decision. Do you want to learn more? And do you want to be uncomfortable for the next 3 years? Because just as soon as you feel like you've caught up to what the industry is doing, before you blink, 3 years later, it's reinvented itself and it's start over all over again, right? So if you've been doing this for how long? I mean, like what all did you do and touch in the industry that led up to this?
Man, I have done pretty much everything.
So let's hear it.
So I've been a coder. I've designed data centers. I've commissioned data centers. I've decommissioned data centers that I've commissioned. Shows how old I am. I have been the equivalent of a CIO. Back then we didn't call them that, but the equivalent of that. I have been a consultant for a lot of different industries. So I worked a lot in gaming, government, healthcare.
The technology that transcends.
Yeah. And I have to say, the cool thing, if you're considering this industry and you're listening, the sexy side of this industry is I have millions of miles going all over the planet. And I have extended family all over the globe.
Yeah. I got friends all over the place.
Everywhere.
Projects.
Yeah. And so, there's things that happen in other countries that are slightly different. There's things that are the same, but a lot of what we do in tech is standardized, and those standards are the same kind of anywhere. And, back to what you were talking about earlier about the appeal of tech, before a standard even starts in IEEE, there's 5 criteria that have to be answered. Will it work with everything else in that same standard? Will it serve a unique need? Will it have broad market appeal? That's actually one of those. Like, why would anybody develop a standard if it's not going to appeal to the masses?
Yeah.
And then, making sure they've got vendor support and all the other stuff that goes along with that. But I think that the best part of tech, in my opinion, is tech for good. Look at the kids that sat there and figured out how to use a 3D printer to make prosthetic limbs for people that would not otherwise be able to afford them because they're in the thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
How genius is that? Now, if we didn't have technology and these kids didn't have exposure to that, they never would have come up with this. And the nice thing about tech is that it's a very shareable industry. So now they share those plans, and now everybody can do a 3D printed limb if they have access to a 3D printer. So look how much that one little thing changed. And so that's the thing I think that really fires me up about this next generation is they're digitally native. Now, if we don't lose them to electronics, which is the scary part of this generation also being digitally native, but the fact that they think of technology as the first solution, where my generation, for a long time, technology was a necessary evil. It's what you had to have. Power was, it's whatever that power was. You got to have your books and your records and your all that kind of stuff. And so it was a necessary evil. And now data is a currency in and of itself.
Number one commodity in the world now, right? Missy, a few years ago at DCAC, Missy Young, it then switched. She, maybe it's still called that, right? It's still,
I don't know. Now that they're bought, I don't know.
So I'll say this, but she presented a slide. She's like, hey, this is a couple of years ago. And she's like, yeah, we've created more data in like the last 18 months in the history of the world combined. And I imagine since then, it's only gotten more intense. I mean, we just create so much data every day. When you were evolving through the industry, because you paint with pretty broad strokes, right? I would love to hear you unpackage some of that to figure out, like, did you have mentors that were guiding you? Was it just your curiosity and your aptitude to learn, and you had the ability to sit in an environment and understand? Like, how did you evolve to where you did? And like, where are you now? I mean, you have your own consulting shop, right? And you consult for who? And what are you doing outside of writing books and teaching the future of the industry? How did you take all of those things that you learned from designing data centers to commissioning data centers to decommissioning, all those things that go into it? Walk us through, like, what did you see? What kept you hungry to learn more? I know what wakes me up, and I love this industry. Like, I don't live vicariously in my kids for anything, but I do hope, and I don't talk to them about it, but I do hope that one day they find themselves into this industry, because I'm like, I don't know of another industry that reinvents itself as much as this one, right? It has more opportunity than
For me, it's the ability to constantly learn something new. I have one of those brains that never turns off. Like, I've had crippling insomnia since I was a kid.
Is that from
my
ADHD
brain
or is it from insomnia?
Well, I don't know. I've never been diagnosed, maybe. I don't know. It might just be a brain that never turns off, but, I don't know. But I've kind of learned to deal with it over the years. So I just, I function very well on very little sleep.
Yeah.
But for me, it's that constant learning, and it's because it's like always a continuous brain teaser for me. And I really like that, being able to engage that piece of my brain where it's working to sort things out. And I'm ambidextrous, so I'm kind of equally left and right side brained, if that makes sense. And so I like being able to apply the creative to the analytical and vice versa. Plus, I think, you asked about mentors. I've certainly had some, but I will say this, because I mentor a lot of people too. And mentors and mentees, I think it's an equal relationship. If you're going to make that relationship work as a mentee, you have to be willing to ask, and you have to kind of have some direction. And that's not to say that's a permanent direction. It could change 10, 12, 15 times over.
And that's okay.
Sometimes, and sometimes a mentor is somebody that's just kind enough to sit down and explain some stuff to you. And then you move on, and maybe there's a different mentor, but you know that you can go back to this person, and they become part of that neural network for you that can help answer your questions and help shortcut those things and work on that. So I do think mentors are important. I've had some really, really great ones. One was a boss that was a whiz at programming, and I could go in and, hey, Spanky.
I like the code name.
Yeah. Spanky was a great dude. But I could say, hey, Spanky, I need some help, right? I've got to unpack a way to make this work in code, because you can make it work in your head, but it happened to be one of those programs for these, you've seen these things where you build a couch, you pick your couch, and then you pick your fabric and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we wrote a program back then for that. But the tax laws are different. Like, in some states, sofas are considered a luxury item, and there's an additional tax on that because the price was over X amount of dollars. So how do you account for all of the different state sales tax in a single piece of code? Well, first off, you have to know what the sales tax stuff is around all those states.
And you have to track it when it changes.
And then you have to try to figure out, and now keep in mind, computers are stupid. They know nothing that you don't tell them to do.
Yeah.
Even AI is coded.
But AI is taking over a lot of coding though too, right?
Well, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But back to the mentorship thing. But it is, just to have somebody and have that sounding board, whether it's an official mentor or mentee relationship or not, I think you have to have that, and you have to have that gut check. And sometimes it's a matter of just somebody helping you do a little mirror economics. And I totally stole that from Terry Bradshaw, but I love it. Look in the mirror, see where you're accountable. What did you do to contribute to this situation? What could you do better? What did you learn from it? Because honestly, that's the important thing. We all screw up.
Sure.
I mean, I'm, kind of queen of that sometimes. But,
take a number.
Yeah, right? So, but what did you take out of that? And was the outcome because of what you anticipated caused that outcome? Or could you have had an impact to make that outcome come differently? And I think, to me, that is the big value of a mentor and that sounding board kind of person. And then to evolve past that, the sponsorship, where they bring your name up when you're not in the room, and they help you out, and they look for, when somebody comes to me for a job opening, I know 20 women right now that are looking. So it's like, here's this is up your alley. This is up, this is in your, can I make an introduction for you? And just start helping, which, by the way, Mercy is amazing at. But yeah, just making those.
That's how I met you.
Yeah.
I was like, Mercy, like, I get my ass kicked. I mean, like I said, I still get my ass kicked by not having enough women on here, but I am trying my best. There's dozens of women I've reached out to, and
I'll help you out there.
Okay. But look, there are some that genuinely don't have the time because their day job kills them, or they got kids or whatever, or there are some that just don't feel comfortable being on these things and exposing themselves like that. And I get it, because it's not comfortable for any of us.
Well, yeah, but I'm going to tell you that women are wired differently than men, because we're not really raised to toot our own horn. We're not raised to stand out in a crowd. We're just not. I mean, it's society is what it is.
Your egos are just not as big as ours, as I think what you're
Maybe.
saying. That's
Well,
what it is.
yeah, I mean,
you guys don't have those egos like we do. You guys are more.
And I think women in a lot of cases are a little more sensitive because we wear our feelings on our sleeves maybe a little bit more than men do sometimes. And not to say that that's right and all women are all one way, because I really hate overgeneralizations in a huge way. But I do think that in a very male-dominated environment, like you would probably feel less comfortable doing a podcast in front of a room full of 100 women.
100%.
And it's just...
I've never lived in their life, so I wouldn't know how to explain to them in a way in which they can understand, the trials and tribulations that I have as a white guy, I guess, in this industry or some. Like, does that make sense? Like, I try to have empathy, but I know that I can't explain.
Well, nobody can. I mean, the only thing you can do, in my opinion, is treat people like people. Mm-hmm. And, you'll find, like, I've had women on panels before that have never spoken. And I've kind of like
push them out there,
shoved them into the fold, I've got you.
They just
You'll
need
be
a
on the
push.
stage with me. I'll help you. Don't be terrified. It'll just be a discussion. A few people will be listening in, but it'll just be a discussion, And I think some of that is just getting people out of comfort zones. We used to teach public speaking. It used to be required in school. It's not anymore.
Well, you're right. Some schools probably, like my kids definitely had to go through those things. And I remember vividly sitting down with them and walking them through. I'm like, guys, I talk to people in large audiences frequently enough to understand how uncomfortable it could be. And it's like anything else. It's like going up to the plate and trying to swing a bat. After a while, you just feel comfortable doing it, right? So not that I ever feel really comfortable doing podcasts or being on stage, but it's something that I have to embrace, because you're only going to get better if you face the things that you're most uncomfortable doing. For me, when I was asking Mercy, I said, how come I just can't find enough women to come up and, there's women in the space, no doubt, and there are powerhouses. There's one that I know that would be amazing, and she would inspire so many people. She's like, sorry, man, that's just not my thing. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm trying to help get as many of those people in this space for the sake of my own daughter and the daughters of all my friends and partners and stuff. But I'm like, I got time. We'll figure it out, right? But I'll say, like, who can do that? And I remember asking her, I said, I just need some powerhouses that'll get up there and they know their shit. And she goes, I know a lady right now, she calls us balls and strikes. Like, she is as objective. and it wasn't a negative overtone. Yeah. She's like, listen, this is a person with a lot of conviction in what she does, and she's seen it all. And that's like the first time that you came to speak at DCAC years ago, probably, right? And I don't know how long ago that was. Do you?
A long time ago.
But like, you've spoken more than once and stuff, and I'm trying to always get a steady stable, but how do we dudes go out and inspire these women to get more vocal and get out in front of it more like you do?
I think humanizing it's a lot. If you say, hey, I have daughters.
Yeah.
I need to, like, most of the conversations and panels I've been on about women in the industry, the most active participants are dads of daughters.
Hell yeah.
Without a doubt. Because they see what the industry looks like today. And they want it to be different. The attrition rate for women in technology right now before the Rona, is 67%.
Really?
Not that leave their job, that leave the whole entire industry. And I find that criminal, because every known digitally documented thing lives in a data center. Mm-hmm. Every known digitally documented thing.
Yeah.
That includes us, our medical records, our children, our families, our pictures, our banking, our everything. Even that one island that nobody can go to because they end up dead, those people are documented in a data center. Everything we know about them from looking at them from afar are documented in a data center. And so if tech is going to be what tech needs to be and what it can be, it needs the influence of everybody that uses it. And that includes women. And right now, we need more women in leadership positions. We need more women in the industry. I have a regular call for women in the industry where we can bounce ideas off each other, figure out who needs to get into what account, who has introductions to this, that, and the other thing, and have tried to build up, some of those support circles. And there's a lot of organizations that have done that. It's unfortunate that they're kind of pocketed. So we kind of took a different approach, and we use the internet for that so we can bring in more people in more different areas. But I think part of it is just making them feel comfortable enough to sit in a room. So that was, kind of, I talked about the 3 soapboxes for this book. Women is clearly one. I do have a vested interest there because I do, excrete at least some level of estrogen at my age. But, I think that just to be supported, like I can't tell you the number of sales calls and stuff that I've gone on with salespeople because I'm the propeller head in the room, right? And as soon as, these people were very well trained on a product or a specific set of products. And even when I had vendors calling on me, they knew their product well. But as soon as that conversation varied out of that a little bit, or even a fringe piece around it, women, a lot of the women, or even young men really, not just women, but especially women, would just glaze over. And they are immediately in that moment excluded from the conversation. And nobody wants to work where they're excluded. So why don't we give them the tools necessary so they've got some basic level knowledge so at least they don't feel like they're being excluded and they have no clue what that conversation is about, and then we can see where they want to grow and flourish. And I think those kind of grassroots internships, apprenticeships, those kind of things, to kind of grow some of those skills because they're not learning it in school. So they got to learn it somewhere.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm trying to figure out how like we could put a message out. Like, I think it's awesome that you're doing your audio, your book on an audio format, because I think that you'll find that, even this podcast, right? We never sat down and said, hey man, we have to do a podcast. What happened is of the 3 top complaints I get every year at DCAC, it's not enough time to listen to those speakers, because let's face it, you dilute them when you have more people speaking. Sure. Like every time, if I do fireside chats, then they could, 50-50 airtime, so to speak. But when you did panels, it was like, you'd get a sliver of a thought cycle that they had, and then you'd be like, wait a second, I need to tug on that string more, and you wouldn't have that time. So then people were like, I didn't hear from that speaker enough, or why don't you do that conference in multiple markets or multiple times a year? And then I realized I started bringing a lot more veterans to the conference to introduce them on my own. Like we would just use points and be like, maybe I can't bring 50, but I could bring 5. Right. And we would figure out ways to be like, just sit front and center and learn and listen and just be immersed, because those are senior commanders or something that are going back, or senior NCOs that are going back, and they're like, I know that you're looking to get out and you most likely want to go back where you came from. Everyone gets out of the military traditionally, they go back to the market they came from. And I'm like, but go tell everyone that this industry not only values them, but it needs them. We're 85,000 people short right now between now and 2025.
No. 300,000.
But that's just in the United States. Yeah, I'm just saying in the United States. But yeah, you're right. Globally, we're 300,000. And that is based on a crystal ball that doesn't really have an accuracy beyond 6 months, and we're predicting 3 years.
Yeah, and nobody knows about the retirement level.
The silver tsunami that's coming, which I do think that there's some pressure that is existing right now with the looming of a potential recession. And there'll be some people that maybe they thought they were going to pull the plug and pull out sooner. Maybe they're like, I'm going to hang out for another year and see what happens to my retirement plan or something. But they may linger longer than they hope to. But as long as they're teaching, right? Because now there's a skill gap, right? There's those of you that have been in for a long time and have seen the industry from day one evolve to where it's at. So the trend you get to see better, right? You've had a front row seat for years in this industry. I've only had one since 2002-ish, 2001 is when I got in. And I was a service engineer when I first started. So like, I didn't know much of shit other than how to build and replace UPSs or commission them and stuff like that. So I learned through, being on those construction projects and then going upstream on the electrical permutation.
See, that's perfect, right?
It was
what
awesome.
A great apprenticeship program.
It was perfect.
Back to my original statement. We all went through an apprenticeship program.
I think that what we're trying to do...
Not formal, but...
Well, look, so the DoD Skill Bridge program was started around the collapse of the secondary lending market, I think, and the economy was so volatile that there were... Uncle Sam does an amazing job of teaching people that are civilians today and into the military tomorrow. And they teach them advanced, technology and weapons and machines, and they teach them the hierarchy of business and chain of command and, how to be selfless in the way that you operate and putting, the mission or the command first. But they don't do such a great job transitioning you back into the civilian fleet, which...
Well, they don't probably really want you to transition back.
No.
That's what I hear from when I work with TAP officers and some of the military people that I've worked with is...
It's not designed for that.
Well, they don't want you to transition. They would much rather you re-enlist.
And at some point, the party's over, right? If you're me and you serve up your one time, or if you're career people and you're doing 20, 30, the party ends for all of us at some point. And then how do we help? And the DOD did this thing called a skill bridge program that said, look, we'll give you a 6-month internship. So as long as it's a company that's in an approved DOD skill bridge program, meaning they've written some sort of curriculum that's been approved that says you have up to 180 days or your last 6 months of active duty where you're being paid by Uncle Sam, all your benefits are covered by Uncle Sam, but you're working in an apprenticeship for one of these companies. And we've sat down with multiple operators that are like, you could use our sites as an incubator. You could put people on our programs and our facility technicians will train them in the hopes that in months later, everybody benefits. The veteran learns a skill. So when they try to transition out of the military, that gap that they are having a hard time hiring them from because they have no experience, now they're like, well, they do. They actually have been exposed.
Well, there's a lot of transferable skills.
A ton from the military and the trades. But my thing is, those people that can utilize the skill bridge program can use that as an incubator to get into the space while they're still on active duty for the final months or up to 6 months of their active duty, and we could teach them and we could use that. And I think that apprenticeship model that you're talking about, the trades are exceptional at it because they have journeymen, all these things up to master. And I think in our space, by the time, if you go to college right now for data centers and you started today, and you graduate 4 years from now, whatever degree you have would be obsolete because whatever they trained you is already outdated, right? So the best way to do it is I do think the best way to start is to have some sort of skill set with your hand, right? If you're not everybody's meant for college. I went to college for a few years, struggled. I just went because that's what they told me I had to do.
Right. Well, that's why a lot of kids go, yeah.
Yeah, mom and dad said go.
Yep.
Miserable. The homogenous environment that's created from a traditional educational platform is designed to, let's think about why schools were created in the first place, right? We're in the fourth industrial revolution. During the third, they were like, we need factory workers, industrial factory workers. We need them to be able to sit down and be spoken to in a way in which they go out and they function in a predictable way that typically has a layer of obedience, and they're not going to talk back, right? So I didn't raise kids like that. I raised kids that were more, I've found that there's no such thing. You and I have had this conversation. I'm like, there's no such thing as a balanced child. You'll either have one that has too much confidence or one that doesn't have enough.
Right.
Now, the one that has too much, that's the one that's going to most likely get you more letters home from school, right? You're going to get more calls from teachers because they fall outside their outliers.
I was that kid.
Yeah, take a number. Most of us. That's what I'm saying. Like, you're talking and I've talked to you enough. I'm like, it's not called insomnia. It's called ADD, right? I have that too. I guess I could call it insomnia sometimes, but I am so passionate about what I do that if at 4 o'clock in the morning I wake up and I'm super excited to get to work, I'm getting to work, right?
Same.
And I have to get what's in my head onto something that I could. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
And I think that passion is not rare. It's not unique. A lot of people have that. It's just whether or not they have it for this or for that or for something else. And those apprenticeships are what's lacking to have more of that adoption rate into this space. And we're trying to create a Costco for that DoD skill bridge for the industry. So we've written curriculum by, partnering with some of those groups that already have training platforms, like DCD has platforms, IDCA, EIEIO. There's a lot of groups out there that have stuff. And we're like, I'll just take their curriculum and I'll say, this is what we'll teach them. They'll be immersed in that data center operator's environment. That operator's like, great, we're training people. And when they're done with active duty, if they don't hire them, no problem. I'll take them back. I'll hire them and I'll go find them a different job because now it's easier to do that because they have experience.
Yeah.
And that's the whole piece.
And they'll be more successful because they have a little confidence too. That's the trick, right? You're not setting them up to fail. You're setting them up for success because you're giving them the training. You're giving them an environment to learn. You could go get a certification, but if you don't practice it, how much do you remember?
Hard. Yeah.
How much do you remember from high school math?
Listen to me. I went to a lot of advanced training in the military. I remember I took a job coming out of the military, and it was really soon after I left the military, and I went to a job interview, and they asked me to draw a full wave bridge rectifier. I mean, I put something on paper and there was probably a few things that were pointing in the wrong direction or some shit, who knows? But I'm like, I haven't done that since I was in school, right? So like, why would I remember that now, right? So you do have to remain proficient, but that's why I think like books are fantastic. Like the book that you have will stand the test of time as a stepping stone.
It's the basics.
It is the basics, but then you'll find people that are going to be like, okay, they've eaten through that, and they're like, what's next? And the books that are static are great because you need a foundation to launch the rocket from. But I think after that, it's the podcasts that you're on and the podcasts that we host, or the podcasts that, like, my favorite podcasts are probably, the ones off Data Center Frontier or Data Center Hawk. Like, I think Dave Liggett really, I like his more because his, I could go back to them at all times and I could listen to one that he said and where he'll predict like, hey, this is what's going to happen next year. I go back 3 years ago and listen to one and be like, he was 4 out of 5 or something. I mean, he was, and like some of you that have been around for a long time, you can predict, you've seen history repeat itself. And you've
repeatedly.
So my thing is this, like, you're watching this, like we had a board meeting last week and we had our first external board member get voted on. And he's a guy he's in my opinion, he's the Michael Jordan of our sport. Like the guy has done it all and seen it all. And you and I were talking about Peter Gross.
Yeah. He's an amazing man.
And just a selfless mentor and leader. Like I can't begin to count the number of stupid questions I've thrown over the fence to that dude. And instead of laughing, he's like, well, let me tell you, Kirk, and he'll just walk me through the basic shit where I feel like an infant, but that's what those types of people of that magnitude of knowledge and experience and wisdom do. Right?
That's how you learn anything. That's how you learn language, right? You start out with a few words, then the few words turns into more words, and then more words turns into insomnia.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. But,
but for you, you're doing this. You're mentoring people. You've self-imposed that, which is why you wrote the book. The things that you're doing now to put it in an audio format. I mean, I imagine in between chapters, maybe you add another twist to something, or that's.
I did put author notes in that. Yeah.
100%. You should totally do that because I love that about audiobooks. Like I'm listening to one of David Goggins' second book right now. And in between, he has an author that reads the stuff for him. And in between, that author almost does a podcast and like interviews him. What the hell is that chapter about? Right. And he'll deconstruct those things so that a sailor like me could be like, oh, now I get it, right? Because some of those big words that they'll throw on that paper, I'm like, oof, got to Google the context, So I'm sorry, I went to public school in the West Coast, so I didn't have a chance. All right. Yeah. But my thing is, there's so much to be gained. And I tell these people, I'm like, the reason why we started the podcast is because it's the only way I could reach the bases, right? I can't get all the sailors out here or all the soldiers and all the airmen, but I can get this packaged up and sent back to the fleet or back to, some Marine Corps base or Fort Hood or wherever. And people will be like, okay, so.
Don't send it to Camp Lejeune.
Well, Pendleton, we definitely send, we are omnipresent at that one. But I'll tell you, I've learned that those infantry people, like when you were in the space, there's a huge influx of military here. I mean, ESG is a factor. There's a lot of folks here, but I don't think it's been intentionally designed for that. It's just a lot of people have figured out like, hey man, those people tend to be able to come in day one, minute one and help in some respect. But I don't think it's really been designed to target the military people. It's all been, I know a person in the industry and that's how I got in.
Well, there are some companies that have very intentional military recruiting. And they do that because military are adaptable. They think well on their feet. They take direction well. They are very coachable, very trainable, and they know how to be part of a team. And you can take those core soft skills.
They show up to work on Monday.
Yeah, and you can train any hard skill around that you want. As long as they have that willingness to learn, they're coachable, they think fast on their feet, and they're ready to jump in with both feet. You could teach anybody anything. I mean, if you think about it, if you go back 100 years, people were still cutting people open based on drawings that were copied from one country doctor to another country doctor out in the middle of the wilderness, and you would trust them to put a knife and cut your gut open
while you're biting down on a wooden spoon.
They didn't do that through college. They did that through us learning from each other. And I think as humans, we do an exceptional job of teaching each other. But, back to your question about how to get more girls in there, look at the number of people in the industry. If everybody took 3 girls, brought them to 7x24, a WIMCO, an AFCOM, one of those local DCAC, something that's a local chapter event, or to a data center tour. Maybe reach out to a whole Girl Scout troop because they do technical merit badges now, and so do the Boy Scouts. Bring them into a data center, bring them in, have a guest lecture, set up a Zoom call, right? I do those. I'd be happy to do as many of those as you want. You can add lots of people to a Zoom call. We can talk about the basics. We can talk about how it works. All of those things, I think, start building that level of exposure. And I think if we go with the young women, then they see that they're supported. And I think that is, pretty critical, especially when they see other people in the industry doing what they're doing. Like I'm working with a friend on an event right now that's going to be down in Houston, and we are not going to have any male panelists.
All right. So what's that event?
So,
Why don't you talk about it in case anybody was listening and wants to go?
So it's not my idea. It's Jackie's idea, and I would love to say her last name, but it's Pserbowitz, I think. It's a lot of letters is what it is. She's Jackie P to me. But anyway, it was her brainchild, and the idea was to take women that might be uncomfortable in the industry and teach them things like, do you want to speak on a panel? This is a good chance to do. There's going to be 250 people there. It'll be small. It's all going to be very supportive women. Do you want to learn how to play golf? A lot of decisions are made on golf courses.
Yeah.
Are you uncomfortable playing golf? We're going to have a 2-2 golf tournament after our golf lesson.
I love it.
We're going to have different panels. We're having a pajama party cocktail hour just so it's very informal and women can talk to other women in the industry. And then the panels are mentorship, sustainability, how to build your network. We have some really great ones for that. Professional mistakes I made and how I overcame them. There's one other that escapes me, but it's a great venue. It's going to be July 28th and 29th down at a golf course down there in Houston. In Houston, yeah. So
and it's designed to just put a spark into these ladies and let them know that there's more opportunity, or
exactly.
Okay.
Well, yeah. So the idea is we want. Well, let me back up a little bit. When I was starting out in this field, I was the only chick. I was the estrogen balance everywhere that I went, everywhere, and so.
Did you have resistance?
Oh, yeah, in some cases, the good old boy network in Mississippi is strong,
Wow.
and it's still strong. In a lot of areas, it's strong. But and I don't say that because I don't think it's a malicious thing, right? It's just natural human nature. You gravitate to the people that do the same things that you do, that understand what you do, and people do that. You can have a room of 500 people. Like we used to have a global sales meeting, and you bring people in from every different all the different countries. And they would still clump together by country,
by tribe,
or clump together by, all the techie people would clump over here, the salespeople would clump over here.
They tribe up.
We do that. We tribe up. That's just what human nature does. So when I say good old boy network,
I get it.
There's good and bad everywhere, right? But we want to start building up more of that support system for women in the industry because we want women starting out to learn from women that have been there a while. And we want... we encourage to bring new women on the panel. So maybe next year you won't have as hard a time finding another woman to do your podcast.
I'm just calling you.
There you go.
You
do that.
Go get
do that.
Dude, listen, Mercy was my easy button. Every year I'd call Mercy. I'm like, we need some powerhouse women up here to go rock the crowd. And I'll tell you this. There were most times when we had DCC, when we'd get done, like they would rank the speakers. And most times when we had women always were knocking the ball off the cover off the ball. I mean, some of the best speakers we've had have been the highest ranked speakers we've had at DCAC. Some of them have been female, and that's big. They talk about it from a very humanistic perspective, like you say. They don't go in there and be like, "This is from the optics of a female." They just go in there and be like, "This is how we should look at it, up, over, and out," right? But I also know that that's a window that I'll put together and be like, help me figure out how to reach more of those people because I'm not kidding. I was at DCAC this year just walking around and someone that I didn't even know pulled me aside like, hey, this is great, but why aren't there more women? I'm like, why don't you help me get more here? I'll give them free tickets. What do they need? I'm all for this. What do I have to do? And that's why I'm like, coach us up. Tell us what we got to do. I'm not saying we're all cavemen, but I'm doing what I think I can do. But the rest is just give me some pointers on how we could open up and use our platforms for what you're trying to accomplish. Because believe it or not, we all see the value. My EA is, yesterday I'm sitting there working and she just looks at me and she's like, hey, I'm going to put 30 minutes on your schedule next week so that you could stop and pause and give some affirmation to some of the folks on your team. I didn't ask for that, but she just knows that they need it and that I need to be a better leader. So I have to do those things. Doesn't matter her position. She doesn't matter her title. She manages up. Like, we all work for that person, it seems like, at some point. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Like,
Well, I mean, that's what a team does, right? You all feed off each other's strengths. You point out where there's, maybe a little something you need to be doing over here.
I have all these, I have we have plenty, 16 females out of 55 people. If I could have more, I would, but I'm always just hiring the best people that apply. And my thing is, those ones that we have, like, we give them every opportunity to have their voice, and having someone that's bossing around my executive leadership team and telling us, make sure that you are doing affirmation and make sure you're doing those things. Like, that's the value of D&I to us, is like, we have all these dudes that are all tough. I have all these John Waynes, a bunch of combat guys or something. I could ask them, hey man, you need some help? Oh yeah, I'm good.
My brother racked John Wayne and put him on his knees.
What's that all
same
about?
Golf course we were talking about. Yeah, he was walking out of the men's room. He's a little guy. He was only like 6 or 7 years old at the time. And he was walking out of the room. John Wayne was walking in. He got so excited. He ran back like to tell my mom. And he ran back because he wanted to see John Wayne again.
Collapsed into him?
Yep. Head to
privates.
Yeah.
That's how you drop to his knees. But that's an amazing story.